it you're at your own? Hi there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to LeWeb' Paris for the third and final day. And this is our final Hangout, but it's certainly the topic of which is not the by far the least interesting. I'm joined by Brian Solis. He's the principal of Altimeter Group. He's a best-selling author, he's an advisor to many, many companies and startups, and he's something of an authority on disruptive innovation. I'm going to ask you to give a brief description of disruptive innovation. Before that, though, I'm just going to introduce Antonio. Give a little wave in Ireland.
Hello from Cork. Welcome, Brian.
And to Benny in Paris. They've got some questions for you as well. I'm going to ask you, though, it's one of the terms that we've been hearing quite a lot over the last few days: disruption, disruptive innovation. What is it?
You know, even hearing you say it, it makes me smile a little bit, because it sounds like a word that could only be invented in Silicon Valley. But it is very intentional. It's a very intentional description. So innovation. Let me give you just a 2-minute definition. So I study disruptive technology, right? That's technology that changes behavior or norms, right? That can happen from anywhere. Innovation, as we know, is something that is new, right? It's either a revolution or a substantial evolution of something. But I think a lot of people that you see that come to tech conferences or that we read about in the news, they're more iterative in terms of iteration rather than innovation, right? So how many times have you met a company that says, we are the Uber of ... or we are the Airbnb of ... So what we're really seeing is more iteration. But disruptive innovation is the innovation that is introduced that changes a market and changes how the people within that market behave. So for example, I had a company here with me at LeWeb' on stage called Scully Helmets, or just Scully Systems, because they're going to be more than helmets. And they have integrated basically Google Glass inside of the helmet with speakers and a camera to provide the rider with an abnormal amount of control and confidence and basically perception of the world around them with inside the helmet. And that's going to change the entire motorcycle industry. One helmet, that's disruptive innovation.
Is that would be something of an earthquake, not just for the makers of helmets, but the makers of motorbikes, and why not even the makers of cars, no?
Absolutely. So one of the examples that Dr. Marcus Weller, who's the CEO and founder of Scully, talked about was a Scully-ready motorcycle, and they introduced the first partnership with Aprilia that takes the gauges from the motorcycle and incorporates it inside the helmet. And they have a very innovative design. So when you're riding and you look ahead, what you don't want to do is look down and have to refocus like you would on a piece of paper. So they have this infinity sort of technology that's based in the display, so that no matter where you're looking, it's always constant, so your eye is not refocusing, thus being less dangerous. So in that case, right, putting the gauges inside of a helmet, or they're putting technology, a proximity sensor technology inside the helmet, so that cars, smart cars basically, not the brand smart car, but smarter cars, will be able to detect the helmet and not allow the driver to move in their direction, much like if you're coming next to a wall and it starts to beep. And so basically, because of this helmet, we're seeing riding become safer, but we haven't even seen how much disruption is going to happen, but everything's going to change.
The like disruptive innovation as a principle has probably been around since, I don't know, Neolithic times, when
Yes.
Or when people first clacked two flints together. But it was only really defined as in
I remember those
terms.
days, by the way.
It's only in since the end of the last century that economists really defined it Are we living now an accelerated phase of disruption?
We're living now in an accelerated phase of iteration, right? So we're seeing a lot of evolution. So doing things better because technology enables us to be faster, smaller, more efficient, cheaper. We are not seeing as much disruptive innovation as I would like. And this is the theme that I've brought to LeWeb for 3 years now. 3 years ago, I introduced the idea of the human API. So asking developers to not just develop products, for example, the Internet of Things. You have a doorbell, you have a security camera, you have a thermostat, you have lights, and every single one of those has its own app. And so I asked designers to build on top of the human API, right? Make it easier for me, make an extension of me, don't make me go crazy with all of these things, right? That to me is an opportunity. The second opportunity is disruptive innovation is something that happens, right? It's not something you set out to do, right? You don't say, I'm going to be a disruptive innovator. What you try to do, though, is think that your idea could be bigger. So, for example, we have problems everywhere around the world with education, public sectors, governments, healthcare. We have hunger issues around the world. We have people with no water, disease. So there's a lot of opportunity for true disruptive innovation. You just have to want to do something bigger. So no, it's. I don't know that it's accelerating. It's becoming more common, right? And this is an economic term, as you said. I think it is a century old. It's called creative destruction. Every industry, at some point, will be overturned by the new player, right? And so we're seeing that with taxis around the world and Uber. But it's not like they're the first service to facilitate transportation. They just solved problems that were very, very true and very inherent in life. So it's an intention-based, I think, idea where disruptive innovation becomes a result.
Okay. I've got one more question before we go to Antonio and to Benny. It's a book recently published, iDisruption, in which the co-author, John Straw, he argues that over the next 30 years, society is going to change more than it has in the last 100 years. Now that, if you look at the last 100 years, the positives and the negatives, we've had the worst war the world has ever seen, followed by, again, the worst war, even worse than the one before. We've seen the Cold War, we've seen weapons of mass destruction. And on the bright side, we've seen civil rights, we've seen gender equality to a large extent.
Yeah.
Should we not be massively afraid then of the negatives?
Look, change psychologically incites fear. So yes, we should be afraid, but we should also be inspired. I have a saying that I like to share with people that the future is going to happen, right, to us or because of us. And the more it is because of us, then the more we actually shape what this evolution looks like. I refer to this as digital Darwinism, where it's this idea that technology and society, they are going to evolve. Some of the things I don't like the fact that that people take selfies while they're driving cars, but it's just a way of life now. All I can do is try to innovate or introduce behaviors that change it in a more positive direction. But I think, look, in iDisruption, he's absolutely right. Society is going to change. That change is going to accelerate, but think about the goodness that could come from this, right? Better education, better healthcare for everyone around the world, improved ways of getting from here to there. The world is an opportunity. But where I believe that we aren't thinking deep enough is this idea that if society is going to change and if society is going to evolve, what role do you and I play in it, right? Because that's sort of an individual choice. The other thing, though, that is very frustrating and it's very real, is that society is going to change, and some of it isn't, right? And people are living longer, and right now you have 3 different generations that exist, that coexist, right? So you have matures and boomers who knew the world from an analog perspective, right? So, same with Generation X, although they were the first generation to really start to see computers become personal in their youth. Then you had millennials, right, who never knew life without digital, right? But they maybe even had some old style computers. The thing that's most fascinating to me is you have Generation Z, which is young teenagers and earlier. They're the first generation to only know mobile, right? So they're the first generation that is a post-PC generation. And this is important because how they navigate is like this, right? But the world isn't designed like that. Because we have older generations who still see the world from an analog first perspective, and a middle generation that sees it as a click perspective. And see, these three generations are overlapping. One of them is inherently already digital, an expert in digital. It's just a way of life. The other one has to learn. But the scary thing about society changing over 30 years, and trust me, there's a point here, is that some expertise, as the world changes, new expertise is going to be required. And that expertise can't just fall on the younger generations to learn. It's actually in the hands of older generations to relearn, and this is what's scary, new expertise to be relevant in a world that's changing, because it's changing without them or with them. And so we're seeing potentially some of the greatest job losses, and not just gender equality, but age discrimination, because they're simply not qualified.
No, I had my 6-year-old when he was 3. He'd go to photo frames. Let's go to Antonio.
Hi, Brian. You have two very interesting guests this morning, and you were able to bring someone that's trying to solve a problem related with education. And I'm in Europe, in countries like Spain, where they have almost 50% of unemployed people under the age of 25, and something that is happening for at least 5 years, and then you don't see people, governments taking any sort of action. What you see is people moving away from the country, and then suddenly you see someone trying to solve the problem and teaching people how to code. How do you see this type of organic development of someone trying to solve a problem, and then a government who has the power and the means of doing it just have a complete behavior that end up not able to solve problems from their own citizens?
It's a wonderful question. I mean, look, if I can give you an honest answer to this, I'm going to solve the world's problems. So maybe I'll have a new job after this interview. My family's from Spain, and so I visit Spain frequently, and I was there a year ago, and you see unemployment. It's heartbreaking. So the problem that we talked about, this multi-generational coexistence, the problem is that historically we have let people with the most experience become leaders. But they're not leaders, because to lead, you have to lead, right? In any direction, instead of being stagnant. And Spain is a definition, or textbook definition of stagnation, and how an iterative economy can't sustain itself. And what it takes is someone like Jeremy Johnson, who's the co-founder of Andela, to say this is a problem. We have to acknowledge it, right? Because that is, for any psychology major or student or professional will tell you that the first step to bring about change is to say you need to change, right? But yet that's the hardest part about this. In Spain, we saw the king abdicate his throne for a younger generation, assuming that was going to be one of the solutions, and maybe it is. But the real solution is you have to want to solve the problem. What's the problem? The problem is that the unemployed generation doesn't have either the skill set to work in a traditional economy, and the economy itself isn't ready to be disrupted. And so, as you say, they move. This is happening all around the world as well. So then that means that today's business leaders have to essentially create their own Andelas to say, how do we compete for the future? How do we disrupt our own business models? And then how do we bring in the youth and give them the expertise that they need to help us change? Because otherwise, the entire Spanish economy, or any economy, is just 30 years away from complete collapse.
We have to move quickly because we've got lots of questions as well on Google Plus. But first, to our other guest online, Benny.
Hello, Brian. It's an honor to meet you. You're a very smart guy, so I hope my question will make any sense to you. Well, do you think today's disruptive technologies will lead to a few mega companies with mega budgets? And how can someone still create something truly new and maybe world-changing in his own garage? And do you see this could be a problem?
Well, Benny, I see it's a great question, actually, and I might not be smart enough to answer this. We do see mega corporations form. We see them in Silicon Valley, right? We have two right down the street from my house, Facebook and Google, and both are always 2 years away from being irrelevant, and that's a problem. So they compete harder and harder and harder in new markets to stay relevant, right? So that means they get bigger, they get bigger, they get bigger, and when there's pockets of innovation, say someone in their garage, that it's a wonderful thing, because then that company is going to get acquired to help the bigger company become relevant, right? So we've seen it with Facebook in the last year alone, especially with WhatsApp at $19 billion valuation is incredible. And it's also a dangerous standard that was set, by the way. We can talk about that in a second. But at the same time, there's two approaches to this. One is larger organizations that attempt to put themselves out of business by investing in new technologies, by investing in new talent, are going to be more successful than those that don't. Because digital Darwinism favors companies that at least try. And those companies that try, for the most part, become empathetic organizations. And what that means is that they understand the market, they understand people, they understand how society is changing. So when they become empathetic, they become in their own way a little bit more human, because then they're driven by a purpose. So as long as there's a purpose, a mega corporation could be okay. But at the same time, disruption can come from anywhere, right? Uber was born here in Paris on a snowy day, which was actually my birthday, and we couldn't get a car. We couldn't get out of here. So now taxi industries around the world are not sure what to do, and hotels around the world are not sure what to do about Airbnb. And so little companies too can come and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And even companies like Google, search isn't going to be their business in the future. We're going to have self-driving cars. We're going to have digital health. So in a long way of answering your question, it's all about empathy, I think, is a wonderful thing. And I also think at the same time, big companies and even little companies that suck, because there's a lot of them, I hope that society evolves into a place where it is capable of outing corruption, ill will, bad intentions, and we're starting to see that now, right? And a lot of that has to do with what we didn't talk about with iDisruption. Is it's not just technology that's forcing you to change. Our values as human beings are changing, right? So now younger generations aren't probably going to own a flat or a car or a lot of the things that we have been taught to know. They might not get married until much later, if at all. Religion is coming into question now. And so the values of society is changing. So they're going to force companies to be different over time.
We'll go to a couple of the questions that I've got on Google Plus. Girish Gurudat, I hope I pronounced that correctly, asks, are we moving towards convergence of product life cycle and customer life cycle to a business life cycle?
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
That's a very thoughtful question. Yes, but this is my opinion. It's not a prediction. It's more of an ask, if you will. I would like to see companies stop thinking about products. and starting to think about experiences. And I say that because some of the best companies that I love to follow, that I study, aside from Apple, because that's the one that everybody uses, but for example, Starbucks. Starbucks is not a coffee company. It is a lifestyle company. The fact that they've innovated in mobile, we think that that's a technology story, but in the customer life cycle, as he points out, to get an app for Starbucks to work, you can order coffee, you can find your closest location, right? You can pay. You can also manage your loyalty and your rewards points. And so just in that alone, that means that you'd had to bring in CRM, IT, mobile, marketing, and anyone who, it depends on the organization, but who runs the advocacy or the loyalty programs for the company is usually customer support or customer service. So when you bring disparate groups of people together who've never worked together before, you are by default creating an experience as a product because you were inspired by the new customer lifecycle. And by the way, the customer journey and the customer experience, all these things sort of define the new customer lifecycle. So basically what the answer is when you become an empathetic organization, it's because you understand how your customer is different. And you understand that how you're modeled today won't support that. And then you, as an empathetic organization, you reverse engineer how to innovate. You don't just change as a company, though. Starbucks changed. The app changed the company. Those people are now one group within the organization, and now they can build and build and build.
It's interesting that at LeWeb, in this population, in this demographic, you see quite a few Starbucks T-shirts and Starbucks hats. Maybe they're Starbucks employees before shifts, or maybe they
just fans.
Yeah, it's that empathy between customer and between company. Nicolas Charbonnier. Now, is it true? I don't know if you can answer this statistic. Is it true that 99.9% of tweets don't get read by anyone, and that Twitter only benefits the very famous? What's the point, he asks. Isn't most of social media a huge waste of time? Answer that question. Isn't most of social media a huge waste of time?
It's such a loaded question. Well, clearly no. I mean, we're using social media to communicate with people around the world and share our ideas and maybe learn something. I think again, you get out of social media what you put into it, right? I don't care if 99% of the tweets. I don't know if that's true. It's a stat that's thrown around. I don't know if it doesn't matter. I intentionally follow people that benefit my social media experience, right? So I have a saying that I tell people: information overload is a farce. It's a choice. And so I'm very thoughtful about who I follow and who I connect with. But those people who connect with me, what I share, they get value out of it. And it's built in, social media has become an ecosystem for me. It's sustained my way of staying ahead of trends by the people I follow, the things that challenge my thinking. But at the same time, I don't think my ideas would have any acceleration or weight or distance without social media. I'm just a guy who lives in Redwood City, California, and because of social media, I have a community that I could belong to, and it's helped me write books, and it helps me speak at LeWeb simply because this platform of social, the people around us all believe there's something that means more because we belong together. So again, you get out of it what you put into it. But if you think about it just from the pure technology sense, Twitter as an example, and I've studied this, I say that news no longer breaks, it tweets. And so on average, for the first several years of Twitter's life, any major event around the world happened on Twitter 22 minutes faster than the first authenticated media report on the subject. And so it is, as a technology, the most efficient information network ever given to mankind. And we think of it as a thing to share pictures of your breakfast or selfies. But when you think of it as a human network where information is incredibly efficient, by selecting certain people, you create what's called an interest graph. So not to geek out for a second, but when we talk about social media as being a waste of time, we're often talking about the social graph, right? The people you know, the people you're connected to, you have a social graph in real life. In fact, you have upwards of 10 groups in your life. You know, your family, your friends, your coworkers, your people you see at church, whatever sports you play, and they sort of form your social graph. But on Twitter, it's much more defined by an interest graph. So you follow people that share interests, and people follow you that share interests. And when you have these levers that qualify information, you really create different social networks within the social network. And to me, I get a ton of value out of it, and I study the value, and I follow how information flows. I think it's wonderful, and it can be wonderful. It could also suck because a lot of times it does. But again, you should invest in it in a way that improves the experience for the people who are connected to you.
We're going to just have 2 more questions because I know you're a man very much in demand this morning. The first of which, Antonio, do you have another question for Brian?
You should be able to hear me now.
Yeah.
No, it's very interesting what Brian was saying, because I think you need to create your own experience when you are using this media. You have the responsibility. You are the one pressing the button when you choose. You are the one making the choices. So the experience, you have the responsibility of creating your own experience. But moving away from this, over the last few months, I've been attending conferences where there's a lot of people working from banks, and they tend to talk, mobile is the future. We want to create a good experience for our users, and then we see they are not connected with the mobile telecoms. So how you see this, and we see that happening in other places around the world. How you see the future for banks and telcos? Will they merge? What trend do you see in there? I'm very curious about this topic.
These are great questions. I have a research report coming out in a month about the mobile customer experience. And in our research, not just financial organizations, everybody who's investing in mobile are making very interesting strides in app development or responsive development, because they all see that mobile is the future. One of the most interesting findings that I had, and it's going to be interesting, is that I challenge anybody investing in mobile, any company, to stop thinking about it as a second screen, if you will, right? So it's the first screen. Yeah. And that first screen is completely different how you interact with it or what you're trying to do. And one of the things that I found in my research is that if you are, let's just say, a customer of a bank, and you try to go through the journey, try to find the right bank, try to find the right products. Let's say you're a customer and then you manage your money, or in CRM if they're trying to build a relationship with you. That journey can't actually happen all together on the mobile. And one of the I can't remember the name of the company right now, but is a very large financial organization in the United States, bought a company called Adaptive Path. And it's the weirdest marriage you've ever seen, because Adaptive Path is a very famous UX design house. And they have bought this company to become the exclusive UX designer for this financial organization. So they see the mobile experience as being critical for their future growth. Whether telecoms get involved, maybe not, because telecoms have their own problems to solve for. Quite famously, this is ironic if you think about it. Telecoms have the worst customer service infrastructure in the world. And it is because they think like old telecoms, yet they make the things that enable innovation and societal change. So I don't know. We're going to see a lot of disruption on the telco side as well. But I think the future of all of this is treating mobile like the first screen, and a lot of very interesting things happen.
Okay. There's just one last question then before we let you go. And it's quite an abstract question, to be fair. Is disruption itself immune to disruption? Can something ever come along?
That's a great question. It's not immune. That's a point. Disruption should be disrupted. It's in the way that I like to explain it, because otherwise it sounds like a buzzword. It's an effect. It's not, again, an intention. It's an effect. And so I've studied the relationship between cause and effect quite a bit. So if disruption is an effect, then yes, It is not immune. It is going to be disrupted because that is the nature of its existence. And I hope it is. And I hope it actually happens more and more and more.
Listen, it's a fascinating topic. I could sit here and talk all day about it, but we have to let you go. Thank you for taking the time to come and see us.
Hey guys, thank you very much.
Yes, Antonio, Benny, and for all the questions we've had on Google+. Thank you to LeWeb. That's our last Hangout, so we will hopefully see you again next year. And thank you in particular to the guys at Freecaster who you can't see, who do, as they always do, an excellent job organising and producing these Hangouts. So until LeWeb 2015, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and happy disruption. Bye-bye.